Now, the Freudian part is obviously here. Now, everybody knows what the Oedipus complex is, right? Freud said boys want to kill their father because they want to have sex with their mother. So they want to commit incest. The father is in the way, so we have to kill the father. Now, we don't have time to get into all of the function of incest and patricide in mythology, but Morrison spoke about this at length with a reporter named Bernard Wolfe. And Wolfe was saying about how Morrison had brought out the incest taboo as made it into a slogan, into a street cry. And Morrison said, the theme is the same. You can take it that way, you can take it another way. The theme of this song is the same as in Light My Fire, liberation from the circle of birth, orgasm, death. And he said, if you want to take the end as being about patricide and incest, you can do that. But read this to mean accommodation, not extermination, if that suits you more. That's as 20th century as you can get. I only aim to please. So he put this in because he feels that the Oedipus complex, which says that's sort of hanging over us like a cloud. Freud said everybody wants to have an Oedipus complex or an Electra complex, which is the opposite. And you've got to repress that because you want to be in polite society, so you don't want to go around killing and raping. And that leads to sublimation, which leads to art and religion. That's the Freudian view. And the Oedipus complex is, everybody knows what that is. That's part of our culture. Morrison is saying, no. We can have liberation through spirituality and transcendence and breaking through. And that whole thing about the Oedipus complex hanging like a dark cloud over our head on a permanent basis is a myth or a lie. And it turns out Freud came up with this Oedipus complex theory, and we don't have time to get into this, but he came up with this before he went to check out the legend. He knew sort of what the Oedipus complex was. He saw it in himself, and he talks about this in Letters to Wilhelm Fliess. He knew he had an Oedipus complex, quote unquote, and he projected that onto all of humanity, saying everybody has an Oedipus complex. And by the way, we can verify that by going back to Sophocles and see the audience has the same reaction, recoiling in horror to what's going on in Sophocles. So since everybody's had it for 2,500 years, that validates my view of Oedipus. But if you go to the myth, it turns out Oedipus, number one, did not know who his parents were when he killed his father. And he killed his father first without knowing who he was. He did not even know his mother. And very briefly, there's a whole, in Greek tragedy, a lot of misfortune flows through the generations. It turns out Oedipus' father, who he killed, was a pederast. And he went out with a little boy. That's what a pederast does, in case you didn't know. And one of the people, I think it was the little boy's father, put a curse on Laius, saying, if you have a son, that son will kill you. So Laius, Oedipus' father, tried to commit infanticide by having Oedipus, the newborn, killed. Now, Oedipus, of course, is not killed. He grows up with foster parents. He doesn't know who his parents were. One day he hears from some guy, you're not your parents' son. And he goes to the oracle and he says to the oracle, the Greek oracle, who are my parents? And the oracles don't necessarily give you a straight answer, but they don't lie. So the oracle says, you will kill your father and marry your mother. And Oedipus, being a good boy, says, oh my God, I'm not going to go near my parents, who are his foster parents. I'm going to go that way. So he goes that way, and he runs into his father, who he doesn't know, and the father won't let Oedipus pass on the road. And Oedipus, having a temper, hits the guy, and he ends up dying. And then he goes on to the city. The king is dead. There's a plague over the city, and anybody who can solve the riddle of the Sphinx, which is very important here, will win the hand of the queen. And Oedipus solves the riddle, which is the big thing for Freud, because Freud thought of himself as an Oedipus in terms of solving the riddle. So Oedipus, who has killed the father accidentally, then he solves the riddle because he's a very smart guy. Then they say, oh, you can marry the queen because of your, that's your treasure. So Freud thinks Oedipus wants to marry his mother, therefore he has to kill his father. In the myth, it's the reverse, and he doesn't know what he's doing anyway. Now, one of the things about the play that's really important is that the Greek audience sees this unfolding, although the play begins way, way after all this is taking place. Oedipus has been married for a long time. Then there's this other plague. And the Greek audience already knows the whole story. So they are watching this guy unravel the past, trying to avoid his fate. Because that's what Oedipus did. Oedipus said, oh my God, the oracle said I'm going to commit these unspeakable crimes. I'm going to outwit the oracle, outwit the gods. I'm going to go do something else. And he goes and does it. So the audience understands this. And that's part of their connection, because they see this poor SOB trying to outwit the gods and falling headlong into his fate. So one of Freud's things is, oh my God, this audience, we react the same way to this. Therefore, everybody must have an Oedipus complex. So anyway, getting back to Jimbo, he is bringing this up in order to, number one, use Sophocles and Oedipus within the context of the song and posit an anti- and post-Freudian vision of liberation. Just in terms of the press, this was from Bernard Wolfe's Esquire article, and I mentioned Bernard Wolfe earlier. He was somebody that Morrison took a liking to, and they had a 2 or 3 year relationship of artist to the press. And Morrison sort of toyed with him in many ways. Bernard Wolfe writes, Kurt von Meyer had discovered in him rich suggestions of sex, death, transcendence. What transcendence did he have in mind? Sex, death through sex, or sex through death? And Morrison goes the first on Monday, Wednesday, Friday, second on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Morrison was very often asked, young man, explain yourself, explain your poetry, explain your art. And of course he's not going to do that. It's not the function of an artist to explain yourself. So Morrison would get all these reactions, and you saw the whole thing about the ultimate confusion of dementia praecox and profundity. I mean, he had to endure all this stupidity out there and not be able to say, hey, look, this is what I'm really trying to do. So he toyed with Bernard Wolfe and others and sort of danced around the edges of what he was all about. Bernard Wolfe was one of the better critics, because he actually put a lot of Jim Morrison's writings or thinkings into the articles, whereas Dave Bangs and Lester Marsh and Dave Bangs and a lot of those other critics didn't know anything. Now, George Will wrote a scathing critique of the Doors in 1991, and this is double length, by the way. He normally writes one-page article in Newsweek, and this is double length. And it's slamming the Doors. The 60s are now nostalgia, kitsch junk among the clutter in the nation's mental attic. Jim Morrison is dead as a doornail, and then he goes, not a moment too soon. Or 60s are dead, not a moment too soon. But he slams the Doors in more ways than one, and I don't want to read this whole thing, but he goes, Morrison's short, shabby life and its peculiar echo today express a longing that waxes and wanes like a low-grade infection but never quite disappears from temperate, rational bourgeois societies. Reflects a vague, very vague desire to, in the words of the Doors anthem, break on through to the other side. Through what? To what? Don't ask. The Doors didn't. People who talk like the Doors are not, as they say, into details. Now, Will wrote this in 1991, based on the movie. Now, either he is being stupid or he's being lazy. He's being stupid if he had looked at the lyrics and then said, through what? To what? Don't ask. The Doors didn't. Or he's being lazy if he didn't look at the lyrics. Jim Morrison was trying to be very explicit in his poetry. And he went to great lengths to put things into his poems that would help people understand what break on through to the other side meant. So when Will says that, that's absurd. Now, Theodore Roszak was another critic. He read a review by Tom Robbins. The Doors, their style is early cunnilingual with overtones of the massacre of the innocents, an electrified sex slaughter, a musical bloodbath. The Doors are carnivores in a land of musical vegetarians. Now, Roszak, who was a historian, said, this is mock Dionysian frenzy and maniacal nihilism. And then he says, I'm not sure the young really have thought enough about this whole thing about passion versus reason. And then he goes on. He didn't have any indication he'd ever seen the Doors. He just read this thing from Tom Robbins. And Morrison once said, writers they pump their prose up a little bit because they don't have a stage upon which to act out what they're saying. So this kind of prose, I mean, this is 4 guys in an auditorium playing music. electrified sex slaughter, musical bloodbath. I mean, come on. So we're going to get into some of the other lyrics. Morrison had a line, "The only solution in the soft parade." Now, so what he's saying is, this is from a song called Shaman's Blues. Morrison has broken through, and he has found what he's calling the only solution. Later he says, "I love the friends I've gathered together on this thin raft. We have constructed pyramids in honor of our escaping." Now, that's from the Wasp. Now, the escape is not an escape into drugs, alcohol, sex, self-abuse, denial. The escape is from ordinary reality into higher consciousness, salvation, non-ordinary reality, higher levels of thinking, higher levels of feeling. So this escape, Morrison was what I would call a great escape artist. Now, you know, on the Wheel of Fortune, they put these things together. Houdini was an escape artist. Steve McQueen was in The Great Escape. He's sort of like a cross between Steve McQueen and Harry Houdini, a great escape artist. Then he has "The moths and atheists are doubly divine and dying." That's from An American Prayer. Now, the last thing we're going to look at as far as lyrics is, "For the music is your special friend, dance on fire as it intends, music is your only friend until the end." And then "Persian night, babe, see the light, babe, save us, Jesus, save us." Morrison has a lot of references to God or religion, not excessive amount, but he's certainly looking at salvation and transcendence as a key theme and something he's encouraging us to go experience. So he has, "For the music is your special friend, dance on fire as it intends. Music is your only friend until the end." Now, obviously, music is not your only friend, because some of you have other friends, right? But that's where you have poetic license. Morrison, being a poet, says music is your only friend, because he's saying Doors music has the unique capacity to help the listener break through the BS, break through the ordinary humdrum reality, break on through to the other side. And this last quote is from a psychic who was asked to interpret Jim Morrison based on photos only. He was given 4 photos of Jim Morrison, and this is what he came up with from looking at one of the photos. Morrison is taking on the role of a spiritual leader, intent on giving words a divine meaning. He's attempting a form of spiritual psychiatry within his music, trying to lead people to some sort of inner awakening. And he knew nothing about the Doors other than that they were a successful rock group. He saw 4 photos and he was told that Jim Morrison was dead. As I see it, in the Doors music, there's a lot more here than meets the ear. Thank you very much.
It would be untrue. You know that I would be a liar if I was to say to you, girl, we couldn't get much higher. Come on, baby, light my fire. Come on, baby, light my fire. Try to set the night on fire. The time to hesitate is through. The time to wallow in the